What we do here is go back.
Hey everybody, so it's Callum from forestfanjr again. Don't worry, I won't keep you too long for this intro, but I felt the need to do a quick proper intro, and if you want to see why, then I'd recommend you check out the end of the previous part. Speaking of the previous part, it might be a good idea to watch that if you haven't already, before you begin this video. That's all I really need to say now, so let's just get straight on with the actual main bulk of the video. So for those who don't know, there's this feature on gov.uk called Companies House. Gov.uk being the government website. Companies House is this thing that allows you to view a company's information, basically. And you can also find some documents about some companies on there. Now, I decided to search for School X on Companies House, and I found them listed twice. I did look through the documents on both of those listings, and the one that stood out to me the most was the August 2017 Financial Statements document, which was published there in December 2017. It's a 90-page document that was a very, very fun read, but there's 3 pages that have things that I'd like to share here.
My shoes cost more than your whole outfit, so yeah.
We'll start with page 77, which shows the remunerations of 2 employees. Remunerations just being a fancy word for salary. Top one is the School X CEO, and the bottom one is currently the head teacher of School C. Although bear in mind, I don't know if she was the head teacher at the time of this document being written. And I've also hidden their names for privacy reasons. Firstly, take note of the fact that the CEO somehow has an OBE, meaning he's an Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. That's an award for contributions to arts and sciences, work with charitable and welfare organisations, and public service outside the civil service. Genuine question here. Hey, if you're watching, what did you do to earn that OBE? Not criticism, I genuinely would just like to know. But here is the actual criticism. If you take a look at the remunerations, you can see the CEO is paid over £180,000, and the current head teacher of School C, at the time of this document, was paid £15,000 to £20,000. By the looks of it, before resigning from whatever position she was in before, she earned £70,000 to £75,000, which to me seems relatively okay. There could very well be a reason why a pay dropped from 70 grand to 20, and these figures may have changed since this document was even written, but whichever way you slice it, the CEO is heavily overpaid. Here's a fun fact that ties into this point. In March 2018, we got an article from Schools Week. They named 87 academy trusts whose CEO earns over £150,000. They talked about this letter from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, or ESFA for short, and the ESFA were asking the CEOs to justify their pay. Surprise, surprise, School X are on this list. Even the ESFA aren't happy with the CEO being paid as much as he is. So even if the CEO's pay has dropped since the financial statements document was written, it clearly can't have dropped by that much. And to my knowledge, School X have not yet responded to this. I haven't seen anything from School X themselves or any news outlet regarding this. So either 1, they can't justify their CEO being overpaid, so they're ignoring this in the hopes that it will go away. 2, they might have actually responded, but they've done it in private and it's just not been covered by anybody. Or 3, School X have somehow not seen or heard about this. I personally highly doubt it was option 3, and guess which of the first 2 I'm leaning more towards. The article lists the 10 biggest academy trusts in the country. 8 of them are part of the 87 who were named and shamed, but one of the 2 that weren't, as a little interesting fact, their former CEO earned only £55,000 in the 2016-17 school year. If he could get by with that, the School X CEO could definitely get by if his pay was significantly lowered. And here's another bonus fun fact. According to Wikipedia, current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Theresa May, has a salary of £151,000. That means the CEO of School X actually earns more than the Prime Minister. How on earth is that normal?
Easy.
Page 78 shows the staff costs. It includes the amount of staff members employed at the school, and it also shows how many earn over £60,000. The table shows at the time there were 598 staff members, 8 of them earned over 60 grand. And out of those 8, only 1 of them earns over £100,000. Three guesses as to who that is. There's not really any way of knowing who the other 7 people are, but again, it just shows how overpaid the CEO is. Along with that, just look at this cost. Am I reading that correctly? £13,377 in total spent on wages and salaries. If that is true, that is ridiculous. The average teacher salary in the UK is about £20,000 to £40,000. If that is actually £13,377 in total spent on wages and salaries across the whole of School X, something has gone terribly wrong. But remember, I could be reading this wrong. For all I know, it could mean 133,000. It could even mean £13 million. This figure could even be a typo for all I know. So if somebody could clarify this, that would be brilliant.
In my head, it's clever.
Page 82, nothing too major, it just features a very, very weird error. £1,113 plus £13 equals £1,125, apparently. Actual maths say it's £1,126. You would have thought they'd have checked this document before presumably sending it to the government. And that £13, by the way, it says it's in relation to pupil statements. I don't know for sure what that means, but I'm seeing that as them paying students £13 in total to make statements about them. And if that's the case, that's basically bribery. Something that's kind of just been a little bit annoying for me all year, really. They've been referring to the quad and the tennis courts as a playground. Now, Google's definition of a playground in the context of a school is an outdoor area for children to play in. Children, you know, kids aged from 0 to about 12, so that would only go up to year 8. Years 9, 10 and 11 are teenagers, not children. Year 11 are transitioning into young adults. Upper school are not children. Now, I'm kind of alright with them naming the lower school quad and tennis courts as a playground, because that's for years 7 and 8, who are ages 11 to 13. So the way I see it, they should still be classified as children. But like I said, years 9, 10 and 11 are not children. They are teenagers, and they need to be treated as teenagers. Renaming their quad and tennis courts as playgrounds is not treating them like teenagers. And this is something they're still going through with today. School B site is the upper school one. They still refer to that as a playground. It's not a playground, it's a quad or the tennis courts. Over the last year, School X made quite a few questionable decisions when it comes to building and demolishing things, so let's go over those. So last October there were really heavy winds that managed to break off one of the branches on the trees on the School A field. That broken branch was barely hanging onto the tree, and it had fallen onto the path outside and it was blocking the path. So with that, I understand why they'd cut that branch off. But School X went to the extreme here. They cut off about 20 or so other branches, and even went as far as to chop down an entire tree. I mean, here's some footage I recorded back at the time, which I used in School Round Part 3. See the branches that are just lying there? They could have easily cleared that up within a day or two. Maybe it would have taken them another day to get the full tree moved. But how long did it take to get all those branches moved off the field? A month. I don't know whether that's down to School X or whoever they hired to trim the trees down. Either way, it would have taken them a couple of days, but they instead took an entire month to do it. But my main question is, besides the branch that was blocking the path, why would you cut off all the others and chop down that full tree? This is something that School X have never acknowledged, so we can only speculate. Maybe they thought the trees posed some sort of a threat to the path or the roads, similar to the one that was actually blocking the path after it got broken by the wind. But besides the fact that the branches that they cut off weren't even anywhere close to hanging over the fence going over the top of the path, School X trees pose an even bigger threat to the road, because they're actually hanging over the road itself. From what I can tell, they've not even touched them. And so many times when I pass by School X on the bus to college, one of the trees just scrapes by the side of the bus. School X trees are not only next to a bus stop, but School X itself is based on a roundabout. So if one of the branches there breaks, it could not only block the path, but also block a roundabout. So if you're going to trim down the School A trees because you think they're a danger to the road, you might want to have a look at your own trees. Maybe they thought the School A trees were in the way of the construction they had planned. What actually was that construction? Replacing the old fencing with new fencing and putting up a sign. But the trees weren't close enough to the actual fence to be in the way or to be a problem. And based on where they actually put the sign, it would have been one of the smaller branches blocking it, if that was their concern. And that branch, they could have just pushed it around to the back of the sign. Or better yet, maybe not place the sign right next to a tree branch. Also, wouldn't cutting down trees and cutting off the branches for no reason, wouldn't that go against any sort of policies they have in regards to looking after the environment? Surely they've got some sort of policy saying look after the environment. Cutting down trees and cutting off branches for no reason would almost definitely be violating that policy. In November, School X were a little bit indecisive about a particular wall in the School A reception area. The short version of what happened, there was this wall with a window. They knocked it down to fit it with a new wall with a window. About a week later, they knocked that down to take the window out and just put a full wall there instead. Without actually being there myself, I can't really say with 100% certainty which wall it was, but based on how my sister described it, it seems like it's a wall that, like I said, already had a window in it. And that window didn't even need replacing. They knocked down a wall with a window, to replace it with a wall with a window, to replace it with a wall. They did that within a week or two. If you're going to do construction work, what I'd do is maybe plan in advance what it is you want to do. Make sure it's something that you're not going to change your mind on within a week of it being done. This is real life construction, it's not Minecraft. In early March, the gym roof was leaking. While we don't know for sure what the cause of the leak actually was, School X, to their credit, did something sensible. They put out buckets to catch the dripping water, and they put some traffic cones next to the buckets. Around that same time, they also put some scaffolding in the corner of the room. They blocked it with those cones that anybody could just walk over, so I don't know why they even bothered putting cones around that. But because the roof was leaking and the scaffolding was in the corner at the same time, it led to a bit of speculation that the gym roof was falling apart. Thankfully, that doesn't seem to have been the case. The dumb part here isn't exactly the construction or destruction or whatever, but rather it's this dumb thing. While the buckets and the cones were still out catching the dripping water from the roof, the students still had to do PE in the gym, and they had to go around the buckets and cones. Doing PE in a room while the roof is leaking and while you've got buckets out to catch the dripping water and having to go around the buckets, if that's not health and safety violation, I don't know what is. While the buckets were out, the gym should have been off limits. Around early March, they also decided to paint a corridor ceiling. That alone isn't an issue. But again, it's the timing of when they did this, that's the issue. Instead of doing this after school or over the weekend or during a holiday, they chose to paint the ceiling in the middle of the school day. And again, that wouldn't be too bad as long as they closed the corridor off while they were painting. But of course they couldn't close that corridor off because there's classrooms down there. So they still let the students walk up and down the corridor while they were painting the ceiling and while there was still wet paint dripping from it. I really shouldn't need to explain why that's dumb. This one, out of them all, is probably the one that's annoyed me the most. Around the end of April or beginning of May, they moved a remembrance tree from the the playground, to outside the principal's office. The French teacher said it was to prepare for some construction, definitely preparing for construction early with that one because they didn't seem to start until the end of summer. What that construction even is, we still don't know. But an article in the local newspaper came out about the same thing, where they said apparently the tree was in the way of students going to the the playground. In response to that second reason, students kind of have the common sense to walk around a tree, not walk straight into the tree to try and get round between the quad and tennis courts. The playground and the playground. Because School X also limited the access to C block, which is something I'll get to later in the video, School X basically made it so that the gate near the remembrance tree was the only way to get between the quad and the tennis courts. The playground and the playground. But regardless of the reasoning, it's so highly disrespectful to move that remembrance tree in the first place. Some of you may be wondering, okay, well, I get that this is highly disrespectful, but why is this something that affects you the most? Because that remembrance tree was for somebody who was in my year. He died in year 10 after he got hit by a van. Thankfully, he does still have a remembrance bench that, as far as we know, hasn't been moved. But School X, you need to put that tree back. Moving it was so disrespectful. So around the same time as moving the remembrance tree, School X also took down a plaque commemorating when School A first opened in the 1950s. A School X MAT spokesperson said, "The plaque was being kept safe at school." They said the plaque is no longer suitable to be sited on the wall because it has the incorrect name. Seriously? That's seriously your excuse? What was wrong with just adding a new plaque beneath the old one? They're essentially erasing School A history. You can't just do that. Also, it's been about 4 months since then, and to my knowledge, there is no new plaque there yet. Quit slacking and get it put back up. So in early July, they began doing a lot of heavy construction on the PE block, that being the entire PE block, mainly the changing rooms and the gym. What that construction work is, because my sister's been moved to School B, we don't know. But this construction work kind of resulted in something else happening. Because the changing rooms were one of the main things that were being worked on, the students obviously couldn't get changed in there, so they had to get changed somewhere else. Everyone was made to get changed in the nearby college building. Boys were made to get changed in this room. It did used to look like this gym, but School X moved all the equipment to School B, apparently. So what this room's used for nowadays, I've got no idea. And the girls were made to get changed in a random classroom. Not a lot of them felt very comfortable about that. Out of them all, this one is by far the absolute dumbest of the bunch. In early July, around the time they started working on the PE block, they started converting the gym into the main hall and converting the main hall into the gym. It's as dumb as it sounds. You have to go through the canteen to get from the gym to the main hall and back. So the main hall they're converting into the gym isn't even connected to the PE block. Not to mention, that main hall has an actual stage, got a projector for assemblies, and it's actually big enough to fit the whole school in for big assemblies, albeit barely. The gym does not have a stage, it does not have a projector, and it's a bit smaller than the main hall, so it's more difficult to fit everybody in. When I was at School A, we did occasionally have to have assemblies in the gym. That was mainly when there were exams going on in the main hall. If the projector was needed for an assembly in the gym, presentation or whatever it would be projected onto the wall at a very awkward angle. They could just move the stage and projector from the main hall to the gym, but why even bother? It's perfectly fine as it is. Or more accurately, it's perfectly fine as it was, because what I just said is exactly what they did. If you look at this map from the 2018 to 19 planners, you can see the gym now has a stage in it, and the main hall has a fitness suite in one half of it, and small hall in the other half. I honestly don't know what the thought process is behind all this. They could have just converted the gym into a fitness suite, or the little room that just comes off the gym that nobody really uses. You could have converted that into the fitness suite, or you could have just left it all as it was because it was fine. But no, you had to waste your time and money swapping 2 rooms around. Now, I don't know when exactly this happened, but at some point during the year, they replaced the basketball hoops on the School A tennis court, the playground. Now, the actual hoops themselves were perfectly fine as they were. They looked like a standard basketball hoop, they didn't even need replacing. School X added their own mark to it, however. They completely replaced the target square with the name Town Academy. How narcissistic could you get? Okay, so let's go over the timetable that they had last year. The timetable that's provided in the planner shows that the years 7s and 8s had a slightly different day to the years 9s, 10 and 11s. Warning bell and morning registration, lesson 1, they're still at the same time. Lesson 2, it starts at the same time, but for the years 7s and 8s it ends 5 minutes earlier. And because lesson 2 ends 5 minutes earlier for them, they get a 5-minute longer break. Then they have lesson 3, which starts and ends at the same time for everybody. But then it gets weird, because year 7s and 8s have lunchtime next, but year 9, 10 and 11 have lesson 4 next. Why? Then after that, year 7 and 8 have their lesson 4, and upper school have their lunch. So why have they just swapped lunch and lesson 4 around like that? Then after that, they have lesson 5, which is the same for everybody. Then lesson 6 starts at the same time for everybody, but for year 7 and 8, it ends 5 minutes early again, meaning they get to go home 5 minutes early. Yeah, you heard me right, 6 lessons. When it was School A, there were only 5. The school day also ends at 3:15 now. When I was there, it ended at 20 to 4. So it ends earlier, and I suppose that's not the worst thing in the world, but they crammed a 6th lesson into a 25 to 30 minute shorter day. And the way they achieved that was by shortening the length of the lessons and varying those up a bit. So instead of it being 5 lessons, all of which are an hour, lesson 1 was 50 minutes, lesson 2 was 45 or 50 minutes depending on year group, lesson 3 was 50 minutes, lesson 4 was 50 minutes, lesson 5 was 55 minutes, and then lesson 6, 45 or 50 minutes, again depending on year group. The timetable really should be exactly the same for everybody across the whole school. Shouldn't be varying with lesson lengths and when you have your lunch in lesson 4 based purely on your year group. It's also not fair that lower school get their lunch earlier and they also get 5 minutes more break and they get to go home 5 minutes early. That just isn't fair. I will point out though, some of the teachers later on in the year, they did let the upper school students leave 5 minutes early for home time. I don't know why they bothered swapping lesson 4 and lunchtime around. Because of how long each one is. Lunchtime is 40 minutes, lesson 4 is 50 minutes. So as a result, pretty much throughout most, if not all of your lesson, you've got a bunch of kids running around outside screaming. And if that's not distracting, I don't know what is. And again, like I said, 6 lessons instead of 5. 5 lessons were bad enough as it was. 6 lessons is overkill. And also, why would they even want to shorten the lesson times? 1 hour was fine. All they've done by shortening the lesson times, they've made it so there's less time to cram in all the useful stuff you're going to need to pass the exams. Fun fact, not related to school ec, 98% of what you learn is a waste, so... And as a bonus, in the middle of August, I had a look on the Town Academy website, and I found they had the timetable listed on there, but there was something on the timetable I found a little bit worrying. At the bottom of the upper school side of it, after the end of the day, it says period 7, lasting from 3 to 4. I'm hoping that's just a poor choice of words, hoping that's just a slot for like after school clubs. 5 lessons were bad enough, 6 overkill, but if they actually planned on adding a 7th lesson to the day, solely for upper school, I dread to imagine. As for the 2018 to the 19 school year, timetable changed ever so slightly. And by ever so slightly, I mean they're leaving 5 minutes early for break or 5 minutes early to go home. That's not a thing anymore, thankfully. But what they did was kind of swap around a little bit who gets lunch in lesson 4 first. On the School A site, where it's Year 7s and 8s, the Year 7s have lunch first and then lesson 4, while the Year 8s have lesson 4 then lunch. Meanwhile, over at School B, Year 9 and 10 have lunch first, then lesson 4, and Year 11 have lesson 4, then lunch. Although a lot of Year 10s have been seen around out at lunch when they should have been in lesson 4, so I don't know what's going on there. Honestly, I don't know why they can't just have it so that everybody's out at lunch at the same time, and then everybody is in lesson 4 at the same time. Honestly, I don't even see why they had to change the timetable at all. It was fine as it was. While 5 lessons were stressful, it's definitely better than having 6 or even 7 lessons. So, School X set into place a bunch of new strict and quite dumb rules. Ones that definitely did not and would never have existed in School A's time. Firstly, here's one from 10 years ago, just so you know the strict punishments and rules and all that aren't something new for them. According to Wikipedia, in 2008, the School X head teacher, the same guy who took his holiday in term time, suspended 74 students for downloading and playing a game on the school computers. School A had their own version of this sort of thing play out when I was there. Because when I was there was this point where my year group found this thing called BetterNet. What you did with BetterNet, you download it and then it could unblock the blocked websites. A lot of my year group downloaded BetterNet and they used it to unblock mostly games and social media websites. Of course, because there were a lot of people using BetterNet, the staff eventually caught on, and the ones who were caught using BetterNet had to uninstall it and they were given a detention or 2. And that was the end of that. So there you go, if you download something you shouldn't, at School X you get suspended, at School A you just got a detention or 2. So School X, they're one of those schools where you say, oh, you should have gone at break when you asked to go to the toilet in lesson. But that argument has problems of its own, which I'll discuss another day. But they do have a system in place on the off chance of the teacher letting you go. So firstly, during lessons, they lock all the toilets in the building, and there's a master key of sorts that's kept at reception. That key is attached to this little block of wood that says toilet on it. If in lesson you ask to go to the toilet and the teacher decides, yeah, go on, they give you a toilet pass, then you have to go to reception to get the key first. They let you take the key, which means that student then has access to all the toilets in the school. After that student's gone to the toilet, they then have to lock the toilet back up, return the key to reception, and then go back to class. Part of the problem with that system is that it takes way too long to go. Surely, if you let a student out to go to the toilet, you'd want them to come back to lesson as quickly as possible, wouldn't you? But by having them take a detour to reception to collect and then return a key, the student's out of lesson for a little bit longer than they would be normally. But then the toilets in School A's C block, they seem to have had their own system in place specifically for lunch times. If you needed to go to the toilet at lunchtime, you'd only be allowed to go into one of the toilets in C block, and you'd only be allowed in through one of the 3 doors into C block. And there's always a teacher stood by the one door you're allowed in. That one door has a teacher keycard scanner thingy on it, but when you need toilet you have to go to that one door and hope that the teacher lets you in. So if you're in the playground, you have to go around past where the remembrance tree once was, go all the way round past the field and past the the playground, just to go back inside. So basically you're just walking around in a circle just to go into the toilet. And as to whether or not you actually get in, that kind of depends mostly on who the teacher is. Some let you in, some don't. But there was this one time where my sister and her friends tried to go to the toilet then, and they had to keep going back and forth between the 3 doors into C block to try and get in. The teacher in the corridor wouldn't let them in for some reason, and he kept going back and forth between the doors as well. I'll have an illustration up here now to show it, but just imagine going back and forth between those doors on a loop for about 10 minutes, trying to get the attention of the teacher, only for them to go back to the door you were previously at. Then you'd go round to try and meet them, but then they've moved back to that door again. You go round, they go back. Just imagine that on loop for about 10 minutes. Eventually the girls just had enough and they went round through the 3rd door that wasn't being monitored. And they weren't allowed in through that door, but they just didn't care at that point. That situation should not have been a thing that happened. They say you should have got a break and lunch, and then one of the teachers does something like that. Unbelievable. So, if you didn't know, this year the UK had a massive snowstorm near the end of February and beginning of March. We'd also previously had a bit of snow around Christmas time. School X, of course, they naturally ruined any fun the students could have had. You'd have thought they'd just say, no snowball fights, and just leave it at that, right? Well, they did say that, but it's the punishment for doing it that's the problem here. Because with School A, if they said no snowball fights, but you threw a snowball anyway, you'd either get a couple of warnings, or you'd get a detention if you just kept on throwing snow. School X, a bit extreme here. If anybody was caught throwing any amount of snow and ice, they'd get excluded. I wish I was joking. I mean, I understand if they don't want people getting hurt or things being damaged from having snow and ice thrown everywhere, but exclusion is too much. That is too far. Let them have a little bit of fun with a snowball fight. If things do go too far, give them a warning or 2. Then if they still don't listen, a detention is enough, and then you can just leave it at that. But guess what? There's more. Apparently, if a student was stood outside anywhere when there was snow and ice on the ground, no matter whether they were just standing there, whether they were just walking normally, doing nothing else, whether they were actually throwing it, they'd get isolation without question. That's especially dumb for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's punishing students for literally no reason at all. Secondly, you might recall earlier, students aren't allowed indoors during break or lunch, with the exception of the canteen. And again, like I said earlier, not everyone can fit into the canteen. So that leaves a bunch of people walking around or just stood around outside, with the risk of being excluded or put into isolation, just for standing still, not interacting with the snow at all. Thankfully, that was just during the Christmas snow. During the February snow, they didn't have this rule. So during the February snowstorm, you were allowed outside, but you still weren't allowed inside. Which again, not the best idea when it was about -2 degrees outside. Just let them have a little bit of fun in the snow if they want. If they start going too far with snowball fights, a couple of warnings and then a detention will be enough. And if they just want to stay out of the cold or away from the snowball fights, let them stay indoors. Simple as that. However, I do have to give them credit where it's due. When the February snowstorm got really bad, they did close the school early. And they did get the word out in time. Unlike my college, when I found out it was closed after arriving an hour later than normal. So remember how I said in the planner section that aerosols were apparently banned? Well, it seems like they may have completely forgotten about that, because in early February they banned students from using aerosol sprays after PE, and the reasoning for this is so vague. They just said, and I quote here, because of a teacher at School X. They honestly couldn't get much more vague than that. What do you mean by because of a teacher at School X? Did that particular teacher have asthma and somebody sprayed aerosol straight at them or something? So School X, some clarification on that, that'd be great.
Can we stop throwing because everyone's going to go home?
March 15th, a Year 11 girl got isolation. And why did she get isolation? Well, if you couldn't tell by the transition slide, she threw a piece of ham in the the playground. Apparently she did this on March the 14th, even though she wasn't even in school that day. Which means either she did nothing wrong, or she actually threw the ham on like the 12th or the 13th or something. But even if she did throw the ham, even if she aimed it directly at like a vegan or a religious person, isolation would be way, way too harsh for this. Honestly, a detention would be pushing it. If she threw it on the floor, litter duty would be fine. If she threw it at somebody, make her apologise, and then move on. Simple as that, no need for isolation. So I said I'd come back to mobile phones, and here we are, talking about mobile phones in school. So at the end of the academic year, School X handed out this end of year letter on the 20th of July, and something that was written at the end of it was their rule on mobile phones. Now, I knew they didn't allow them on site at all, whereas School A only allowed them at break and lunch, but I wasn't aware of just how stupid the punishment is. So, for comparison's sake, with School A, if a student was caught on their phone in lesson, it would be confiscated and then returned either at the end of the lesson or at the end of the day. Like I said, if you had it out at break and lunch, as long as you weren't taking pictures of the staff without permission, you're fine. With School X, if you're caught with your phone out at any point during the school day at anywhere on site, it will be confiscated for not 1 day, but for 5. So if you're caught with your phone on site on a Monday, you get it taken off you and you don't get it back until Friday. So you don't have your phone for a week because it's being held at the school. But it gets worse, believe it or not. If the parent goes in to collect the phone at any point during those 5 days of confiscation, the student then gets a detention instead. Why? 5-day confiscation is bad enough as it is. But then having a detention replace those remaining days of confiscation just because your parent collected your phone for you, that is ridiculous. Look, the 1-day confiscation is enough. As long as you get your phone back by the end of the day, that's fine. Maybe give repeat offenders a detention. But this is way too harsh. So throughout the year we had a bunch of staff members leaving School A. More than normal. Normally you don't get more than about 5 teachers who leave each year, but we have a total of 13 leave this year, and we don't exactly know the reasoning for a lot of them leaving. A fair amount of them showed no sign of wanting to leave before they did so. Normally teachers let students know in advance when they're leaving, and normally they'd explain why they're leaving. Like if they're retiring or if they've got another job somewhere else. But with some of them, we have no idea why they've gone. So I'll quickly go down the list of the 13 staff who I know have left, and if I know the reason, I'll tell you the reason. Number 1, my old history teacher. We have no idea why he left. He just kind of left. Although I might not know why he left because my sister didn't have him as a history teacher. I have no idea who was in his classes at the start of the year. So he might have told them, but because I don't know anybody from those classes, I don't know the reasoning. Secondly, the old French teacher. She's retired, but she has joked about going to work in Aldi afterwards. So I imagine that'll be fun one day if I go to Aldi and find my old French teacher working there. Number 3, the art teacher. As far as we know, her departure has nothing to do with School X. She just wants to go and do art workshop stuff. Those are something that schools as a whole just don't offer. Number 4, my old philosophy and ethics teacher, who was also an executive principal. He's apparently gone to School X itself. No idea what exactly he does there, no idea whether he actually had any say in it, but yeah, he's gone. Number 5, my old English teacher. He's got another job, but we've got no idea what it is or where it is. Number 6, my other old English teacher. He also got another job, and we know what that is. She's now the head teacher of School E. No idea how much of say she had in that, but... Number 7, my old PE teacher, who this last year has also been a biology teacher. He's being transferred to School C. I'm 99.9% sure that was not his choice, and that's because School C is the furthest away from where he lives. He also said to his Year 10 class that he was being transferred for money reasons, but he didn't elaborate any further than that. Don't exactly know what he meant by money reasons. He could have meant maybe he'd get paid more at School C, though I don't know why they just offer him the same payment at School A. Could mean for some reason School X just don't want to pay him at School A. Other than that, I've got no idea what he could mean by money reasons. Number 8, my old wood tech teacher. Like my old philosophy teacher, she's also been moved to School X itself. And like with my old PE teacher, I'm 99.9% sure that wasn't her choice. In fact, she actually told my sister's group that School X requested she goes there. Something tells me that request was more of a demand. She even told my sister's group she wanted to take the group with her. 9 and 10, both the librarians. One of them retired, but we don't know for sure why the other one left. The best theory that we've got is the library was closed, so she had no reason to be there. And I'll get onto the library being closed later in the video. Number 11 and 12, these are both teachers who came from School X to School A this year. They both went on maternity leave, so they're going to come back at some point. Finally, number 13, the most prominent of them all, the School A principal. Before the takeover began, back in June when it was first being announced, he made a brief announcement at that assembly. He planned to leave months in advance and that the takeover had nothing to do with him leaving. If that was the case though, maybe he could have told somebody that maybe, I don't know, a few months before you announced you were leaving. You know, when you first had the idea of leaving. I don't know why he waited until the School X takeover was announced, because now it just looks like they gave him the booze. Wood tech teacher also apparently knows where the principal's gone now, She did tell my sister's group, but my sister wasn't really listening at the time, so she didn't hear the name of the place he's gone to, but apparently the principal is fully aware of what's been going on over the last year at School A, although my sister didn't hear what he thinks of it. And also, something else relating to teachers, School X said they'd ensure that if the regular teacher was absent, they'd bring in one of their teachers from one of their other sites to take the lesson over. Then they'd go back to the normal place when the regular teacher returned. And to the best of my knowledge, that rarely, if ever, actually happened. There were more supply teachers than there were actual teachers from other sites, like was promised. So to me, it looks as though one of the following scenarios happened. Firstly, the School A teachers realised this School X takeover wasn't going to go well, so they left so they wouldn't be associated with it. Or secondly, for whatever reason, School X would rather have their own teachers than the School A teachers, so they found a bunch of ways to get rid of the ones who didn't leave by themselves, such as money reasons or being requested to go elsewhere. However, both of those scenarios might not be the case at all. It's entirely possible that it's pure coincidence that 13 staff members left, with only 2 of them set to return, and those 2 being ones who came from School X. Ultimately, I'll leave it up to you to decide what you think. So, when it comes to the corridors at School A, there's been a history with both School A and School X of them limiting the access to it outside of lessons, or outside of queuing up for lessons at least. School A were a little bit inconsistent with just how much they enforced all these rules, but most of the time the rule was you're not allowed to be in the corridors during break and lunch. But that was only for the A and C blocks. It never really applied to the B block that much. Of course, School X have these rules, but like with a lot of the other things I've mentioned, they took it to the next level. Firstly, with the A block, they actually properly enforced not being allowed to go down there. Not the best idea when there's lockers down there, so they're not allowing students to go to the lockers outside of lessons apparently. They only allow you to go down A block when you're going to and from a lesson. No other time, not allowed there any other time. Throughout the year they did relax this a little bit more, so when you walk down the corridor you basically had to hold up your locker key to show them you're going to your locker, and most of the time they let you go onto your locker. They later moved the lockers from A block to the English rooms at B block, but they did that when they started refurbishing the English rooms. Don't know why they decided to move the lockers to where they're refurbishing something, especially when there's already a bunch of lockers outside those classrooms. But yeah, a little bit dumb. With the C block, they had this thing called the one-way corridor system. Now, this was something that School A tested a few years ago. The basic idea was, when you're coming in from the tennis court, the playground, when you're going through that door, you can't immediately turn left and go down the corridor to the quad, the playground. You have to go down the corridor, take the next left, and then go out that way to get to the quad, the playground. Now, School A only did this once, and when they realised it wasn't working out because nobody really followed it, they discontinued it. And they didn't try it again. School X decided to give it a try, and if they did it once, I suppose that wouldn't be the worst thing if they want to give it a trial run. But they actually tried it twice. They had the exact same idea that School A had with the way you go around the corridor. First time they introduced it, they did it randomly in the middle of a Friday afternoon and gave absolutely no warning whatsoever. But they gave up shortly after they realised nobody's following it. And then when they tried to bring it back a second time, they again gave up shortly after, and presumably that's also because nobody followed it again. They haven't tried it since then. I'm guessing part of the problem might have been the signs that said one way. That's because they blue tacked them to the wall, but they kept falling off. And a lot of the time, when the teachers picked them up, they didn't bother trying to stick them back on the wall. So yeah, the one-way corridor thing has failed a total of 3 times over the last few years. So if I were them, I wouldn't bother trying it again. Near the end of the year, the School A library was closed. Now, of course, no clear reason has been given, but I reckon there's a few contributing factors to this. Firstly, the reading programme. School A had this programme called Accelerated Reader. Basically, you'd have a book level, you'd go to the library, you get a book that's within that book level, and when you finish reading it, you take a quiz on the book to see how well you read it. And depending on how well you did in that quiz, you get a certain amount of points, and you had a points target that you had to hit. It would also give you your reading age. So even if the results were a little bit questionable at times, it still got the kids reading at least. School X replaced the Accelerated Reader programme with their own. But the problem was, they didn't enforce it like School A enforced Accelerated Reader. Similar to Accelerated Reader, students were supposed to go to the library and get books out, and then they'd read them during morning tutor time. Now, of course, not everybody did that. When that was the case with School A, they just sent the student off to the library to get a book there and then. With School X, not many of them enforced it at all. So a lot of students didn't bother getting books out, and then a bunch of the teachers didn't bother trying to make the students get books out to read them. So that resulted in fewer people going to the library. Then a few months later, the librarians left. Like I said earlier, one of them retired and the other we don't know for sure why she left. But based on the fact the library wasn't being used that much, best conclusion I can come to is that she left because there was no point being there if hardly anybody even bothered going. But School X didn't bother trying to hire a replacement, so that meant there was nobody there to run the library. At some point shortly after this, the library was locked, and then it was only used for young carers meetings. The key to the library was given to one of the teachers on the same landing as the library, so if you actually did want to go to the library to get a book, you had to go to the teacher and ask them for the key to the library. Nobody asked for the key. So now that the library is closed, the only reading that students do is the Shakespearean texts and the 1800s poems and plays that they have to read in their English lessons and overanalyse. And again, that has issues of its own, but that's not a School X specific thing, so I'll leave that there. So ultimately, if reading scores start going down at School A, I think we know who's to blame. I'll also add on something here from the 2018-19 school year. We got a map of School A in the planner, and that seems to show that the library is now just a generic classroom. You really didn't need to change the library into a classroom. So there you go, that's part 2 of School X A Year in Review. Hope you enjoyed it. Not really too much I need to say here at the end of this part, other than just keep an eye out for part 3.